A brief description of the characters Oystein Euronymous Arseth, the mastermind in the Shadows profile. Long black hair, blue eyes. Public persona. He constantly sought to centralize and dominate the Norwegian black metal scene through his inner circle. In public, he cultivated a dark, uncompromising image, positioning himself as the absolute leader of the movement. Private life. His inner circle described a highly paradoxical personality. Away from the cameras, he could be talkative, deeply passionate, and highly social. However, his behavior frequently oscillated between charisma and psychological manipulation. 2. Pele dead. Olin, absolute melancholy. Profile, long blonde hair, green eyes. Psychology, marked by severe psychological distress, he suffered from anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, chronic emotional emptiness, and severe sleep disturbances. The most radical elements of the music scene at the time unfortunately amplified his struggles rather than offering support. Personality. Friends recalled a deeply complex individual. On one hand, he could be gentle, shy, and possessed a very dark sense of humor. On the other, he remained distant, secretive, and entirely detached from reality. His social interactions, particularly with women, were heavily restricted by intense shyness. 3. Varg Vikernes. Ideological radicalization. Profile, long brown hair, blue eyes. Background. Influenced from childhood by a family environment with strict identity-driven views, he quickly developed a highly confrontational and radical worldview. His impulsive personality made it impossible for him to conform to societal norms. Dynamics. Fueled by a toxic rivalry with Euronymous, he constantly pushed the boundaries of provocation to establish himself as the most extreme figure in the scene. His intolerant views extended to an ultra-patriarchal and archaic view of society. 4. Jan Axel Hellhammer. Blomberg, technical rigor profile. Drummer of the formation. Mindset. Confronted at a very young age with the harsh realities of the underground scene, he developed a cold, pragmatic resilience. Instead of letting himself be consumed by the surrounding darkness, he focused entirely on musical progression and technical perfection. Stance. Unlike his peers, he refused to align himself with destructive ideologies. For him, the musical movement represented the freedom to think for oneself, rather than blindly following the dictates of radical figures. 5. Jørn Necrobutcher. Stubberud, the structural pillar profile, bassist and founding member. Character. Gifted with a volatile temperament and fierce pride from adolescence, he frequently clashed with Euronymous' cynicism. Role driven by unyielding determination and absolute confidence in the band's potential, he single-handedly kept the group alive through decades of turmoil. He remains the true logistical engine and historical memory of the band. The history of Mayhem. From obsession to tragedy. The story of Mayhem begins in the mid-1980s in Norway, when a young guitarist named Oystein Arseth, under the alias Euronymous, set out to create the most extreme, dark, and sinister music possible, effectively laying the foundations of Norwegian black metal. However, the band crossed into a truly legendary and macabre dimension in 1988, with the arrival of Swedish vocalist Per Yngve Olin, famously known as Dead. Dead was a deeply troubled young man, so obsessed with death that he genuinely believed he did not belong in the world of the living. On stage, he would mutilate himself with broken glass, bury his stage clothes weeks before shows so they would smell of decay, and keep a dead crow in a bag to inhale the essence of death before performing. Euronymous, fascinated by this authentic darkness, actively encouraged his singer's self-destruction to fuel the band's ultra-extreme image. The original bassist, Necrobutcher, began to feel increasingly uneasy about this toxic atmosphere and the morbid downward spiral taking place in the isolated cabin the band shared in Krokstad. The point of no return was reached on April 8, 1991. Left alone in the house, Dead ended his life by slitting his wrists and shooting himself in the head with a shotgun. It was Euronymous who discovered the body. Instead of immediately calling the police, his first reaction was to run to a nearby shop to buy a disposable camera. He rearranged the scene, took several photos of the corpse, one of which would later be used as the cover for the infamous bootleg Dawn of the Black Hearts, and collected fragments of dead skull to make necklaces for scene members he deemed worthy, all while claiming he had cooked and eaten pieces of his singer's brain. Horrified by Euronymous' total lack of empathy and morbid opportunism, Necrobutcher quit the band on the spot, unable to forgive the desecration of his friend's death. To complete the recording of their landmark debut album, De Miseris Dom Sathanas, Euronymous had to rebuild the band. The drummer, Hellhammer, remained loyal to his post despite the chaos. Euronymous then recruited Hungarian vocalist Attila Szihar and reached out to a talented, highly radical young musician from Bergen, Christian Vikernes, known as Varg, who operated alone under the name Burzum and took over bass duties. Initially, the alliance between Euronymous, the self-proclaimed leader of the inner circle operating out of his record shop, Helvet, and Varg, the active church burner, seemed perfect. However, a destructive clash of egos quickly erupted. Varg, growing in influence and radicalism, began to eclipse Euronymous, whom he dismissed as a hypocrite, a coward, and a poser incapable of backing up his extreme words with actions. On top of that, major financial disputes arose, as Euronymous owed Varg significant royalties for the release of Burzum's albums on his label, Deathlike Silence Productions. The paranoia and mutual hatred peaked in the summer of 1993. Euronymous, feeling threatened by Varg's rising status, told close associates that he planned to kidnap Varg, tie him up, torture him to death with a taser, and film the entire ordeal. Tipped off and determined to strike first, Varg Vikernes drove from Bergen to Oslo through the night of August 10, 1993, accompanied by Snorre Ruch, Blackthorn. Arriving at Euronymous' apartment in the dead of night, a violent confrontation exploded. Panicked, Euronymous tried to flee down the stairwell in his underwear, screaming for help. Varg pursued him and stabbed him to death, delivering 23 stab wounds, including a final, fatal blow to the skull. Varg's arrest days later blew the lid off the Norwegian black metal underground for the mainstream media and the justice system. In 1994, while Varg was sentenced to the maximum 21 years in prison, De Mysteries Dom Sathanas was finally released. In an incredibly ironic and morbid twist, the album featured the bass lines recorded by the murderer, Varg, alongside the guitar tracks of his victim, Euronymous, all anchored by Hellhammer's thunderous drumming. Following this earthquake, Hellhammer and Necrobutcher eventually resurrected Mayhem from the ashes of this tragedy, forever cementing the band's name in history as the ultimate and terrifyingly real embodiment of musical chaos.